right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started. Try to stay as on time as possible. Apparently, classes are also taught in this building. My name is Thomas Hunt, and on behalf of Matthew Ricchetti and the Federalist Society and Students for Liberty, I'd like to welcome you guys all here. Thank you for coming. To our guests, thank you for being here. Professor Giro, it's an honor to have you here. Luckily, all three of you are going to be well equipped to deal with what I imagine will be the slow filter of students as they filter into the back of the room. Distractions are nothing new to the three of you, I'm sure. Our guest of honor tonight is Professor Edward Giro. He is an associate professor of theater at George Mason University, the mother campus, as it were. He's taught there since 1991, but while he's been teaching there, he has also been part of the Shakespeare Theater, and in that role, he has appeared in over 75 different performances, has been nominated for the prestigious Helen Hayes Award over 14 times. In addition to that, once he speaks, you'll recognize that he's perfectly suited for another one of his side jobs, and that is narrating various television programs for things like Discovery Channel, Science, and National Geographic. In his current role, the reason he's here now is he is currently performing in The Originalist, which is at the Arena stage and has been extended for a second time. So if you haven't been able to get tickets, look again. The tickets are now once again available if you're not able to win them here tonight. In that role, he plays, as you're probably not surprised by looking at him for 1 second, Justice Scalia. And if you haven't had the opportunity to go online and take a look at some of the clips that are available online for viewing, his mastery of the mannerisms of Justice Scalia is off-putting, to say the least. I don't know if he could sit for the court, but he could at least act like he stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night. So to that end, being both ostensibly a legal expert and an expert in theater, he is getting through both barrels tonight. From the legal side of the house, we're privileged to have Professor Naomi Rao here. She is a constitutional law professor after graduating from Yale and Chicago Law. She also served in the White House General Counsel. In addition to that, she's uniquely suited to offer critiques here tonight, as she did clerk for the Supreme Court, Justice Thomas, as she fondly says, the actual originalist. On the other side of that, to discuss the theatrical aspect, if implying that law doesn't have a theatrical aspect, is Nelson Presley. He is currently a professor of political theater at the University of Maryland, where he got his PhD in English. He is an accomplished theater reviewer for the Washington Post for almost 16 years now. In addition to that, he is your new book is coming out, I believe. It's out? Already come out. Yep. Go buy it now. It's on Amazon. American Playwriting and Anti-Political Prejudice. It was published in November. So it is not his first time interviewing Professor Giro, so hopefully his expertise will benefit us all here tonight. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Presley to start off with festivities. Very good. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Just to make sure that we're all on a bit of a common theatrical footing, I just want to say this a little bit about the play, and then we'll sort of draw it out. And to start, I also want to say that I've had the pleasure of watching Ed act since Shakespeare Theater was at the Folger, so it's a very long time. And please trust me when I tell you he's one of our very best. This is the boilerplate from Arena Stage, when a bright, liberal Harvard Law School graduate embarks on a nerve-wracking clerkship with Justice Scalia. She discovers him to be both an infuriating sparring partner and an unexpected mentor. How will their relationship affect one of the most incendiary cases ever to reach the nation's high court? This is only a 3-character play. It's largely Justice Scalia and this new clerk with a 3rd character who comes in. This is now playing in the kind of new 200-seat Kogod Cradle Theater at Arena Stage. And it's on a long thrust, which means it kind of comes out into the middle of the audience with the audience on 3 sides. So for an actor, it must be a little bit like being a model on a runway. And I just say that to maybe not exactly like a model on a runway, but that level of exposure. I say that just to let you know that there's no place to hide, both for the performer or for the ideas. It's really a place where these ideas are where the characters and the ideas are isolated. So with that much of sort of a preamble, I'm just sort of looking at 2 things. The phenomenon of the play, because it's quite a hit. It's one of the spring's big hits here in Washington, D.C., and then a little bit about the process of it. So maybe first you can tell us this is a tremendous hit. You're going to be off 2 weeks, but then it's further extended to May 31st, and I think it's the biggest hit that this little theater at Arena has had yet.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's the first time they've put the theater into this configuration, which is very exciting. The new building was opened maybe 5 years ago. It's the first time Molly decided to adapt it be in the thrust configuration. And it's the Kogod it's called the cradle because it's designed intentionally to be a place of birthing new plays. But this is the first time I think that it's had such success, probably because of the subject matter. It's got need for Washington political scene and so forth. So yeah, it's fantastic.
And you're very well known in Washington as a classical actor, not only, but certainly a long association with the Shakespeare Theater Company. But this makes, at least by my count, 3 very big biographical figures that you have played. He's played Richard Nixon in Nixon's Nixon. Mark Rothko in the John Logan play Red, which was also a very big hit for Arena Stage and on one of the bigger stages. And now Justice Scalia. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's more challenging, where the challenges overlap and go in different ways, Shakespeare or these big heavyweight biographical figures.
Well, the wonderful thing about this play, and certainly the Rothko play, they're language plays, so they have that in common. These are complex ideas. People aren't used to listening to long thought phrases, but when you're discussing law and reading dissents or decisions, it's complex syntax and semantics, and that's very much like Shakespeare. So the linguistic preparation is similar. Character-wise, Scalia is a character of Shakespearean proportion. Truly, he is a great intellect, a great linguist. As I said to him, it's pretty intimidating to be in a room with a man with a 40-pound brain, and which you don't know. But doing biographical characters in particular, the cult of celebrity. But to do characters that, and I think of him, there's certainly the person, and I'm not an expert in law, I'm certainly not an expert in psychology, but in approaching a character, he has that dimension. He's committed to enormous ideas with a lot at stake. And this is about the government of the United States and the responsibility of that. That's an enormous responsibility that he takes with great integrity, and I found him to be enormously transparent, actually. I teased him because actually I got to play the Chief Justice in the Shakespeare play, so I have a little seniority on him. Approaching a biographical character really is no different than any other character, but in one large respect, and that is that there's more material on the record. You can research Rothko, you can research Nixon, you can research Scalia. There certainly is a great performance tradition in the Shakespeare pieces, but that's more an act of imagination, still approaching character in a similar way, but having to discern character traits from the text in a textualist way, which I certainly understand and have been teaching. But the behavior is something that comes out of the imagination rather than from something that's on the record. Whether it be video or, in Rothko's case, there isn't any video, there were just photographs. So taking iconic photos and trying to discern temperament and so forth. So that's the main difference.
And in terms of doing your basic homework, you might want to tell the crowd that you actually had a little bit of a running start, because you know some of these players and you know some of the justices. You've had opportunities to.
Yeah, the Shakespeare Theater had a great tradition of they have a lawyers committee. So they every now and then the lawyers committee, they were supporting the theater, and they would buy out the theater for the evening. They would invite the justices to come and do cameos. So I performed with Chief Rehnquist. Sandra Day O'Connor played my mother in King John. We actually sing together. Justice Ginsburg was in Henry VI, and she got to say the immortal words, the first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. Of course, put the house down. And then she ad-libbed at that and said, and after that, all the reporters, Breyer, Souter, they love Shakespeare. Because the language, there's an affinity to the language, of course, and to these great stories. So I've had a nice relationship with them over the years. In fact, when I went into Justice Ginsburg's chambers recently, I reminded her, we were sitting downstairs in the green room. Her character was dead, and I was playing York, and I was dead. And in a Shakespeare play, there's still an hour to go. You're dead, but you can relax. various states of undress, and I hanging out, who's having his scotch, whatever. And I went up to Justice Ginsburg, and I asked her a little bit about the court. And she held forth for about 45 minutes with everyone around talking about her schedule and so forth and so on. So I reminded her of that. This was some 15, maybe 20 years ago. And I said, oh, yes, I remember that. She said, well, here, I'll show you. And she walked over to her bookshelf in her chambers and said, here's a picture. And there we were. She was taking her bow, and I was holding her hand. And she said, that picture's been on my shelf for the last 15 years. So I've been, oh, my God. So, yeah, they're neighbors, right? Because the Folger was right across the street. So, we were neighbors.
Have we mentioned the playwright's name yet? John Strand.
No, John Strand. Right.
I don't know the answer to this. Has this play drawn more media attention than anything you've been in?
Oh, there's no question about that. I can't remember the last time I was on the NewsHour and Meet the Press, and AP picked it up, and Slate, and I have nothing to do with that, of course. That's all Justice Scalia. He's the magnet. The fact that there's a play written about him, and there's never been a play about a sitting justice. First Monday in October, I think, was the first one. That was in the 80s, maybe?
Fictionalized?
Fictionalized. So, this is a bit of breaking new ground in a way. So it drew a lot of attention. Still does.
Right, and what everybody wants to know, you met him twice?
Yeah, we had lunch in Chambers twice. I watched him speak in front of the National War College. I was at Legislative Auditorium when he and Justice Ginsburg held forth. And I stopped by his office just before we started rehearsals. I gave him a little gift of a book called Shakespeare and Opera, which is a great conversation about the two forms and how they're similar and so forth. And he said, that's very nice. He said, okay. I will call you Ed if you call me Nino. And I said, everybody calls me Ed. So he's very generous, in fact. He's got a great sense of humor.
And this is what everybody wants to know. I mean, what does he like, but also as partly what are you looking for as an actor to build your performance?
Well, you mentioned I had good lead time on this. I knew I was going to do this project about 2 years ago, so I started my research then. I was asked very early on if I wanted to meet him. I said, absolutely not. I'm not prepared to have any kind of substantive conversation. But I read several biographies, particularly Joan Studik's American Original. I read 9 about the court. I read a little bit of his book, the Garner book, about writing the law and so forth, deeply in the weeds. And I read the Federalist Papers, which escaped me in high school, and as a college undergraduate in theater, it also escaped me there. But I thought, I better read these papers. And I was shocked at some of the stuff. I think it was 6. It was Hamilton's first paper when he said, "What we're building here is a commercial republic." What? I mean, that was like I had never heard that phrase before. Never heard that phrase before. That makes perfect sense. That's what we're doing. So I just wanted to get a sense of what was important to him and so forth. In the reading of the biography, and that's really where I did most of my work, is as a character you want to identify personality traits and sort of make some kind of connection to a psychology. What in the formation creates somebody like this, and what can I relate to, and how can I analogously, imaginatively inhabit those set of circumstances, those set of parameters. And it became very clear to me early on we shared a lot in common. We both come from the Northeast, both born in New Jersey. We're both Roman Catholic. We're both Italian American. I'm the grandson of immigrants. His mother's family, his mother was born here. His father was born in Sicily. So the work ethic I understood immediately. The pressure being the only child in his family. In fact, being the only child in both of his families, in an Italian-American Roman Catholic family, that is so strange. So he had all the pressure of his entire family and all the benefits of that. And that need to achieve, and I understood that. The only difference, the main difference between the two of us, other than those similarities, would be that his father was a remarkable man who, within 10 this country in 1920, not knowing any English, was at Brooklyn College teaching Romance languages. My father, by 1930, was president of a local UAW for 30 years, and I suppose that's the difference. I sort of have more of a labor background, and he has more of an academic linguistic background. But the values were certainly clear to me. So when I went to meet him, it wasn't so much of, go ahead and eat and I'll just watch, see how you want to work, right? He really basically affirmed those ideas that I had, and also the analogy of using Shakespeare and analysis of the text as an analogy for textualism in reading the Constitution. And that was exactly parallel. And historicism is sort of a movement in literary criticism that's had its heyday earlier in the 20th century, is now coming back. With regard to understanding Shakespeare, what was Elizabeth in England like? What kind of effect would that have on the writing? So that also had an analogous connection with originalism. But even he would say that he's more of a textualist than an originalist, and I get that completely. What do these words mean? What's the semantics? What's the syntax? Let's go back to the text. In theater, that's a bugaboo of mine, because particularly with Shakespeare, because the directors get ideas and they want to impose it on the text because they're trying to create their own career and have a new spin on the play, and let's make this relevant, and it's hard enough just to understand the text. That's hard enough. Just do the play. I mean, the writer has supplied everything you need to know. So that is clearly the connection I have with his philosophy of interpretation.
I think you've just recruited Antonin Scalia as a theatrical director.
Let
me pass the baton to my right.
That's actually a natural segue. Yeah, I was interested to see that you described yourself as a Shakespearean textualist. And so I'm wondering if you could just, and you started to say a little bit about what that meant, but if you could maybe say a little bit more about what that means and how that may have an affinity with originalism?
Short, trying to make it brief and cogent. These are long, sometimes 25-line sentences before you get to a full stop. A lot of subordinate clauses. So it's a grammar class, really. So when I go to I say to an actor, okay, identify the subject, predicate, and object. And they're all over the place. It's inverted syntax. There's all kinds of rules. Just understand. In fact, I've had some of my graduate students take a speech from King John, which is about a 25-line sentence, and do a sentence diagram. And it ends up being about 8 feet long on newspaper. And to understand the relationship of the words. And how does that help us understand? Well, with Shakespeare, the writer is embedding direction. And he's telling the actor how a character thinks. If it's what we would call a regular iambic pentameter line, for example, steady rhythm, it's a straightforward thought. If it rocks, if the rhythm is off, it's telling the actor that the idea is to express totally explicitly everything that's happening experientially. So the language is the concrete realization of the inner experience as it's happening. So rhythm is particularly important because it's telling you how the person is constructing the thought, right? So you want to look at all those clues to understand Lear, for example. The phrases are very short and broken up because he's having a mental breakdown. So it's reflected in the rhythm and the shortness of the thoughts. Hamlet goes on and on and on and on and on. And he's working the thought out, and there's this different kind of internal experience. So I ask my students to identify simply what is the semantics, what does the word mean. In most cases with Shakespeare, he's coining the word. He's inventing the meaning. So we can go back to the original meaning. It's Shakespeare. If you go to the OED, most times you see these words that Shakespeare coined and it was printed in this play. So we look at the etymology, we look at the syntax, how that operates, and to understand how subordinate clauses work and how to make that music. Now, the analogy in the play is to the score of music, that there is, and there's a similarity with Shakespeare. It's music, and you have to know the notes. So that's the.
And how would you say that that's similar to originalism?
Well, I would say it's similar to textualism in that you want to understand precisely. Well, we had the conversation about the Second Amendment. When he came up with the idea, it's not called an ablative absolute. That first phrase, not an ablative absolute. Anybody know what it is? Come on, you're Federalist people. No, come on. Okay, it's another kind of absolute. It's a phrase of art that has to do with, for example, him being my friend. I invited him to dinner. You could use the objective case, him. So Scalia would say that part of the phrase is an absolute. It's not the operative part of the sentence. The operative part is the right to bear arms, or whatever it is, the individual right to bear arms shall not be infringed. So he basically makes that subordinate. I said to him, well, can we be certain it's an absolute because we're not using the objective case in that phrase? Just asking. So it was kind of fun to sort of get into it. It was sort of totally fun. Well, at least I said I did my homework and I knew what the absolute was. So there is a similarity in terms of understanding the syntax and the semantics. That's the best answer I can give you. I don't know if it's right, but that's how I think of it.
Yeah, and also Malaysia, it's interesting that you said you read the Federalist Papers in addition to some of the biographical. And I'm wondering, in preparation for this, did you feel like you had to really both understand and sympathize with originalism in order to get into this role?
We are required to love the characters that we play. Lawrence Olivier was doing a play called Arms of the Man, and he was doing a character called Sergius, and he hated the character, just couldn't do it. And I think Noel Coward was directing, and he said, Larry, you don't like it, you must love him. You must empathize fully with this character. So, yes, I do. He's easy to fall in love with. He really is. He's got such a great wit of intelligence and warmth, like I said, he's just totally transparent as far as I can tell. I mean, he's grouchy, and he's unapologetic, and there's an integrity about that. He just happens to be migrant. You know, I wish I had that kind of integrity. In my business, I'd lose work all the time. It doesn't have to be politics.
Yeah, and I have a number of my students here, and I make them read the Federalist Papers a lot, as they can attest. And I'm wondering, what did you get out of reading the Federalist Papers from, the non-law student perspective, right? So you're an actor, you're preparing for this role.
Well,
the
first thing that struck me about it was just the remarkable writing, the beautiful turn of phrases, and the argument. It's not based on polls, it's not based on science, it's based on reason. So you have to be really clear with your argument. It's based on your experience, but it's argued in a way that makes it. To me, it's the legacy of the Enlightenment, which is part of, to me, what the experience of being in the court is about. There's a difference between a debate, political debate, where it's persuasive and rhetorical, and a dialectic, which is let's go after the argument and unpack it and deconstruct it and find the best idea and counter it. I've heard the anecdote of one of Scalia's clerks who would argue and argue and argue, and they'd argue back and forth, and the clerk finally relented. And then Scalia took the clerk's point of view and argued and argued and argued and argued. It's about the art of argument, of reasoning. So that's, in a large sense, what I took from the papers. That making your case and respecting the people to whom you're speaking, and respecting the people that you're listening to. That's to me unique to the court. It's a collegial body. It's about the argument. It's not about the person. And that's to me what the play, in some regards, really trying to raise that makes sense that he and Ruth Bader are very close. They've had a collegial relationship since the circuit court when they were editing each other's briefs. That doesn't happen anymore. They don't circulate the briefs anymore.
Well, I have a question actually for both of you, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. But you've written a lot about the demise of the political play, and how there are fewer political plays. So I'm wondering, and also to you, would you say this is a political play? And in what sense is it political?
I have the advantage of having spoken to the playwright, although you've been living with him on this project, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think he's necessarily. He's trying to, just as Ed was just saying, trying to reflect the political schism that we all say day in and day out dominates our discourse, and trying to find a possible way for a little while on stage to reconcile that. Now that means absorbing political ideas that typically aren't heard from very much on stage. That tends to be my gripe, or my observation / my gripe, is that there's little, particularly here in Washington, there's a real skittishness about even addressing these types of subjects. This is a rarity. I think this is a real rarity. And again, certainly in Washington, there's even usually a body of, some theatrical work going on around the country, and plenty in Britain, that doesn't necessarily get its moment in the limelight. So,
yeah, I think that's why it works to have the character of the figure of Scalia being that person, because he is totally unapologetic and is unfettered by political correctness, and actually, revels in the fact that he is that, and he just says it. You don't have to like me. What's the phrase? What are they going to do to me? What are they going to do?
That's what like tenures for.
Exactly. They're all tenured professors. And you imagine, on a committee of 9, nothing ever gets done, of course. But that's exactly what it is. He's a tenured professor. They all are. Yeah, it's great. There's a freedom about that.
Right.
There's
all part of the design.
Exactly, and I think that's a great design. And the fact that John Jay made it equal with the other branches of government, what a brilliant move! Because thank God there's a Socratic classroom in this country where you can actually go and listen to each other and hear the argument and then vote and then move on. It's brilliant. It's not the Congress. They don't have to make money and get reelected. I mean, one of the things that came out from this experience is sort of rethinking I don't know if I'm rethinking, I'm probably getting involved for the first time, considering term limits. It was never designed to be a lifelong career. You go back to your farm after you're done, right? Go back to your job. Serve, go home. Somebody else have a chance.
Now it's sort of go into private equity.
Well, sure. Well, that works. Whatever you go into, but leave the government.
Right. Well, I have plenty of questions, but I'd be happy to open it up to the students, audience members. Questions?
Thanks for coming. So I haven't seen the play yet. As soon as finals are done. But I did read some reviews, and it's interesting. There are some people that just, because of his jurisprudence, obviously just can't stand Justice Scalia, right? It almost doesn't matter, what you say good about him. They just don't like him. I guess I'm just interested. So, given the kind of the insight that you have to his personality, and is there anything you would sort of say to those people?
I'll tell you what I say to those people. When walking out into that theater, now this is a theater, right? So predominantly it's going to be left of center, right? There is a real tension walking into the room. And when I start quoting, the first speech is really mostly his language. So we talk about Roe v. Wade, we talk about Richard B. Croson, and so, and you can feel what people like. Right? And I could tell immediately what side of the political aisle the majority of the audience is from, based on how quickly they can hear his irony. Some audiences don't get it till very, very late. Some audiences get it right away. Say, this must be the Republican. I said to Molly, can we do half-price Republicans? I need a cheering section. Tuesday and Wednesday is the cheaper seats. It's like show your DNC card, get it free night. It's unbelievable. So they've been leaping to their feet, which has been wonderful. One night there was absolutely nothing. They were not. They were. Yeah. Oh, that's really nice. And we took our. My colleague Carrie, who plays the young, as she self-described, flaming liberal young law clerk. We take our bow. Nobody's doing anything. And the third guy, we take our bows. Coming. Nothing. And I was just possessed by Scalia. And I just stepped forward and said, "You're all liberals." Well, they leapt to their feet. But the audiences, their political pants are around their ankles the minute you walk in the room. It's unbelievable. It's a Rorschach test.
Do you think most DC theater goers are left of center?
Oh, yeah.
Is that just because DC is left of center?
No, because theater goers tend to be more. I think listen. Opera's different. It's a higher price ticket. I mean, what do you think? The 99%
I think that's
are stuff. No, I think it's true.
that theater goers are.
Maybe it's
are
crowd.
left of center.
I don't know. Maybe it's not. No, actors certainly are.
Right, actors are. That is the theater goers.
That's understood to be a truism here and across the theatrical
That theater
world.
goers are.
Yeah.
Sure, and that's one of the problems is that you end up sort of preaching to the converted, which is another reason this play is
Right.
is the hot thing that
This
it
is a lecture. This is not a lecture for conservatives. This is a lecture for progressives.
So I was wondering if there's any plans for the play to go elsewhere, for example, like to New York after this. And I was also wondering, he happens to have a very liberal clerk, and I know that there have been times in the history of the Supreme Court that different justices have done that, and I'm wondering whether that's still done. I mean, I haven't heard about that lately. Like somebody will definitely pick somebody from across the aisle. Maybe it's more of a question for you than.
Well, what I understand is it's less since the Roberts Court, but it was more in practice earlier. That's what I understand in terms of having a counter clerk.
I think Justice Scalia historically used to hire one liberal law clerk, kind of almost consciously, is my understanding, and I think that's happened less in recent years. And I think that there are a number of justices who don't really do that. In fact, seek the opposite, right? To find clerks who are at least similar in orientation to their outlook. Not maybe exactly, but I mean, I can tell you from my own experience clerking for Justice Thomas, we were all sort of conservative or libertarian. We disagreed about a lot of things, but we were all sort of starting from a similar place. And I think that that's pretty typical of the chambers. So.
John had spoken to several of his clerks who were certainly progressive, and they would. That wasn't something that they put on their sleeve. Just in fact, they wanted to remain anonymous. But they said to a person, they said that he was probably was the best boss they ever had and probably will ever have. They just loved working for him.
And do you know if the play is being thought to go anywhere else?
Well, there's hope. There's some talks. There's people I know the theaters in connecting to some producers, some other theaters.
You'll call me first.
Oh yeah, bet.
I need the news.
That question is also related to something I was wondering, which is how much do you think that this is a Washington type of phenomenon?
That's a good question.
And do you think most of it's possible that most of your theater goers are lawyers?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, do you think there would have an appeal to non-Washington, non-law?
I think that's a fair question. I don't know whether most of the subscriber base would be attorneys, and we're still largely the audience is still largely subscription based. The single tickets are doing very well, and the extension we'll see more of a single ticket buyer. But I think the question about whether it's a New York play, let's say. I mean, if you think about a play like A Walk in the Woods, which ran for a year with Bob Trotsky, who came out of the Arena Stage, it's an intellectual play. Is that Broadway material? It would be nice. Is it off-Broadway material? That'd be fine too. But is it a New York play? I don't know. I wonder what you think about that.
I think television is way out in front of theater in this respect, and some of the TV is soapy and pulpy, but you get more and more political. We have a show on Sunday nights about the Secretary of State.
Yeah.
So I think we're in a real state of flux here.
Yeah, well, Washington Washington's hot,
Right, and
right?
you're in a position to sort of test it.
I think so. House of Cards, Turn, which, by the way, I'll be on the premiere tonight. If you're not, go home at whatever it is, 2 hours. I'm playing the Prime Minister of England. I'm playing all these. Get the Italian kid from New Jersey. That's yeah. In fact, I'm going to try to lobby House of Cards. They haven't gone into the judiciary yet, so maybe they want to bring back somebody who looks like Scalia. We'll see.
I can imagine it being a play that might be interesting, like at the National Theatre in London, right? Because they do a lot. I mean,
Right.
I was surprised when I lived in England how fascinated lawyers there were about originalism because it seems so bizarre to them. As an idea, they just don't have any. They just can't imagine why anybody would try to find the original meaning of something. And so I always wonder if there would be an interest abroad in this because they have this idea that there's this originalist movement in the U.S. and it's so peculiar and bizarre that.
That's interesting that they hold it that way.
They do, because it's not really, they don't have any analog in their theories of interpretation.
Okay.
And they view it, and I think some people say that American constitutional law is less relevant abroad because a lot of it is focused now on originalism, to which they don't really have an analog. To which I'm sure Justice Scalia would say, who cares?
Well, of course.
We're not writing for the European Court of Human Rights, but I think their view in part is these debates in the U.S. are not relevant.
Too arcane.
Yes. Or they just don't have an analog.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to the extent, though, that the play speaks to the larger question of hyper-partisanship, which is a lot of what John Strand's project is here. I think I heard that the House of in England they're maybe going to disband the Prime Minister's questions because that has become such a charade of political theater anymore, with the partisans banging and hollering on both sides. So there may be some rapport in that respect.
Yeah.
I had a question, Professor Gerald. I can't imagine a role that any actor could prepare for where the actual character has such an enormous body of writing that gives insight into how the man's mind thinks, how he works through problems. Did you find that more difficult, less difficult? Did it change how you approached even preparing for this?
Oh, and it's just such a rich vein to mine to read the dissents, to read the decisions, to some of it's I'm not a legal student, so some of it was deeply in the weeds. But his prose, his introductions, and his perorations they're just great. And he even said to me, "Why do I even bother to write dissents? I can't change anyone's mind of this generation. It's already been decided. So I write it for the students. I write it for the future. And I pepper it in a way to make it interesting reading. That was very insightful on his part. There really is no point. It's already been decided, but it's for future, clearly, and for setting precedent for it, leaving the ideas behind.
I think the justice is one of the more overtly observant religious members of the court. And did you find, so in that sense, did you find that element playing a part in your development of this character?
Oh, no question.
In what way did you sort of try to capture that?
Well, there's a scene in the play where they actually go to the Basilica, the Immaculate Conception. He is a pre-Vatican formation, and he's a Jesuit formation. I'm a Benedictine and post-Vatican, so we have conversations about that. But he's very observant, very strict. I don't think he's a daily communicant, but that's certainly part of his cultural background. It's still very operative, and I think that's part of his project is to keep that at bay as best he can in terms of reading the law and writing the law. And I bet that's a real discipline for him to do.
Question about, as an actor, when you're dealing with a character that's so well known, or at least has such a public persona, whether it be Nixon or whether it be Scalia, people come in already thinking they know about them. Also, at a certain level, are authors writing to that public persona, and yet you've uncovered layers about the person? At what point are you representing the idea of man? At what point are you representing the person? How do you balance that for the needs of the play?
Well, it's a great question. I think it's a collaborative effort. So I'm bringing everything I can to the table to make John's words sound plausible coming out of this character's mouth. I'm also honoring the playwright. The character I'm playing is the one that's in the play. And there are things in the play that he would say are totally unfair. It didn't happen. I wouldn't behave that way. The relationship with the clerk probably wouldn't happen in real life. But it's dramatic license. It's poetic license. So there's a balance between the two. I've had conversations with John saying, I'm not sure the syntax is right, and I don't think he'd say it like this. He wouldn't end his phrase with a dangling participle. That wouldn't happen. It just wouldn't happen. So we rewrote it. So things like that, in terms of understanding his writing, his precision, came into play. But the other piece that you raise is that people know who he is and have an idea of how he behaves. So in a way, I'm at an advantage, because if I can approach that behavior, the audience, for some reason, gets more wowed, even though it's the same approach I would have if I'm playing Henry IV. But they don't know Henry IV. There's no metric. So with Nixon or with Scalia or with Rockwell, there's a metric. People, wow. It's like looking at a Swiss watch with, where you can see the gears working. You can see the work of the actor. Because they know, the audiences here know me, they know Scalia, and they see what I've done to change to make Scalia, so they see the work. And I think there's a level of appreciation for the audience on when that happens.
You brought up the idea of the scenes with the law clerk, and I haven't seen the whole play, just some of the snippets that are online. I hope to get to see it in the coming weeks. But those were the parts that seemed the least realistic to me, having been a law clerk. And I know in preparing for this, you saw Justice Scalia speak and you spoke with him. But I guess in some ways it's a question for the playwright, but also a question for you. How did you figure out that dynamic between the justice and the law clerk? Because in some ways that's the hardest. You could never really, maybe hard or almost impossible to get a sense of that relationship.
Right. Well, maybe you can speak to that too, Nelson. But it's not realistic. It's a drama. It's designed to create a polemic. So there are certain licenses, for example. I can't imagine a clerk crossing the line repeatedly the way this clerk does in this play without saying, "Get out," But I think part of it too is the mentorship relationship. That he sees something in this young person where he might be able to have an effect. And it's because the larger question of the play is not about an honest or realistic representation of what happens in chambers. These people stand in for the body politic. But in this case, they listen to each other, and they gain respect for each other, and I think that's the import of the piece.
So, has Scalia seen the play, number one? Number two, if he has, do you know what his reaction? And I guess number three, maybe this is more something you can sink your teeth into. Do you worry about what his opinion of your portrayal of him would be? Is the purpose of the play to sort of represent who Scalia is to the audience, or is the purpose of the play bigger than that, where you're not as worried about Scalia's portrayal, but more about the ideas? I mean, how do you...
That's a good question. No, as I said to the justice, what I want to do is honor what you do and who you are. That was my mission. inside the body of this play for a variety of reasons. Having never played an Italian American before, having to play this particular Italian American is very important to me, and the cultural background, and also the intelligence, but not to make it a cartoon. The play I did as Nixon is a little bit more caricature-ish, and I didn't want to do that with this. It was too much. I just had enormous respect for what he does and who he is. No, he was invited to come to see the play. He was invited to come. I invited him to come to. Well, we back up. The first time I went into the chambers, the very first thing he said to me when we were shaking hands was, "I just want to tell you, I'm not coming to see the play, but I'm glad they got somebody good to do it, so I won't be embarrassed. Let's have lunch." So it was off the table. I said, "Fine." So a colleague of his said, you might want to ask him to come to a late rehearsal. I said, "Of course, he didn't want to come to a performance because of the value of being at the performance." He said, "What a gracious thing. I mean, think about that for a second." I said, "Good." So I invited him to a late rehearsal. He said, "Well, maybe I'll think about that." So when he was with Ginsberg, Nina Totenberg said, "Are you going?" And in public said, "Well, not to a public performance, but I'm thinking about maybe." And I was in the audience with, "Oh my God, I better write him tomorrow and invite him again. He's uttered something in public." So I followed up. He said, "Okay." And then about 3 days later, he sent me his written dissent. And it was a written dissent. And he said, and further reflection, this is not a good idea. I'll tell you why. Just as you said, if I see it, people will know, and they will want to know what I thought. And I'm damned if I do, and damned if I don't. If I say I like the play, and parenthetically, I'm sure I will find things in it that I will find unfair, people will think that I'm condoning the piece. And if I say I don't like it, I'll be accused of being thin-skinned. So sorry to disappoint. And I said, "Of course, that's why I do." However, on opening night, I went out into the lobby, and Molly Smith, the director, said, "I want to introduce you to John Scalia, the justice's son." Oh, he sent a spy. And he said, we came fully expecting a hatchet job. And he said, "Tonight you made my dad a hero." It's the best review I've ever had in my life. Now, hero to me meant human being.
Yeah.
And that's
Well, I was going to ask on that note. You're performing this in his front yard.
yeah.
And there are going to be people who know him, who work with him. Have there been any other responses that you could share with or without names that have sort of meant something to you, that have told you, okay, I'm on the right track here, or, oh, maybe there's something else I should stroke my chin about here?
Well, there are several people who know him, or friends of his, who said, "Oh my God, he nailed it." Justice Ginsburg came to the show Sunday evening. I haven't. She hasn't opined yet. I'm standing by. I don't think. Maybe Sotomayor will come, but I don't think Breyer will come. But no, the friends of his have said, and Joan Skubik also said, I might have sugarcoated him a little bit, made him more likable than. But she has her own agenda. She's very young. She has her own agenda.
Our Supreme Court reporter thought you were spot on.
Oh, excellent.
So that's a non-theatrical review.
I like the legal responses. They get it. It's good. It's good.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of these questions go not just to your depiction of him, but to your, as you said, the depiction of him within the play, right? So a lot of that is a question for, the way the play works. So.
I guess I have one more question. And I can find this out myself, but to a degree, but when you said that most of the theater goers that come are left of center, most reviewers probably are going to be left of center true? Is that a fair assumption to make? So how have the reviews been? I mean, and what role does that play as an actor, whether they're good or bad, or do you read your own press? Isn't that
watched them close my first year here, and I was very excited about this project. I prepared for a year, did the research and all stuff, and the reviewers said, why do they send a journeyman actor to do a master's job? And we keep looking for Henry V, and we keep getting Giro. So, that was one. So I was a young kid, so that was, after that, everything else is really okay. But I do read them because I do want to know people whom I respect that are dedicated to developing theater, like Nelson, what his thoughts are. And will it sell tickets? Really? Is it going to mean butts in the chairs for us? That's the thing, the commercial value of it. In some theaters you have a terrific subscription base, so you're sort of review proof, but you do want to hear a thoughtful response from colleagues that we respect. And I think they're helpful. We got some good ink, not only in the Post, but in the New York Times. And there were problems with the play. But I think those comments are things that we could respond to and keep developing the piece. Because they weren't vitriolic, and they were thoughtful, and in a sense saying, they were encouraging, actually.
And I would just say, as reviewers, we're not put to the test politically enough, so I don't have to say more than that.
Yeah.
Just following up on what you said, I was wondering whether it's still, in a sense, a work in progress, and is the writer still, does he still make changes? Is it he, right?
John Strand.
Yeah, John Strand. Is he still making changes to the language even, or is it kind of set and this is it?
It is set since the opening, but now that we've had a month of a run, we'll debrief the response to the papers, and we do have a chance to develop a little bit further, and I think we're going to think of it as a work in progress still. We might have some rewrites for the return. When we come back for the final 2 weeks, that's in progress. We're getting this. It's interesting. It's a very interesting play, and I really began. I said to John early on, I'm beginning to fall in love with this play because the layers are getting. I'm understanding the depth that's here that has yet to be plumbed, and understanding the dynamic, what's happening with you. Because the third character really is the audience. It really is. Red was that way. Sometimes they're, depending on how they respond, lean into some things, some nights, and other things some other nights. But to find that when you live it long enough, you begin to see where the connections are in the language, and are we connecting all the dots? And is that theme fully revealed? Does it fully pay off? Those sort of theatrical questions, and I think that's part of the process.
Well, I just had a thought as you said it. The audience is the third character. As the primary campaign season begins to have its entrance, and that's only going to rev up, it's hard to imagine that this play wouldn't continue to be very alive in a room the more that those things, whatever news the campaign begins to kick out.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too because it is a zeitgeist moment because the central case it coincides with the descent, the Windsor descent, and on the 28th of April we're going to get the conflated same-sex marriage case, and I'm privileged to be in one of Justice Scalia's guest seats for that argument, and lunch in chambers afterwards. And we won't discuss the case too much. I'm interested to see how that goes because it'd just be interesting to see how that goes. But it's a zeitgeist moment in that case.
Really timely.
It's very timely. And it may, who knows, maybe because of that, depending on what happens with the ruling, it may kill the play. It may be dead. Or it may have a boost, depending on how the court splits. Or no, it'll be unanimous, in my thinking.
Ladies and gentlemen, speaking of timing, we are out of time for the formal portion. That being said, Professor Giro will be here afterwards to answer any further questions, of which I'm sure there are many. I want to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Debbie Schrader from the Law Library. She is really the motive force behind putting this all together, so thank you very much, and to also Students for Liberty. Professor Rao, Professor Presley, thank you very much, and of course, Edward Giro, thank you very much.